isn't often that we honor comedians. I have a whole list I could name comedians who are rather funny and clean, usually. But today we honor a comedian, and he only became a comedian right before he died. His name is St. Lawrence. Beautiful story about St. Lawrence, and I'll tell you about his comedic words later. But St. Lawrence follows the example of the gospel. He's a seed who lays down his life so it could flourish, the example that Jesus gives us in the scriptures. And of course, he also follows the example of St. Paul's letter to the Corinthians, who lays down his life for God and spreads it out. It's about 398. The emperor is Valerian. Deacon Lawrence is originally from Spain, and he and who will become Pope come to Rome. And he's set up in Rome as the archdeacon, which means he has certain responsibilities. His responsibilities were primarily to take care of the poor. The deacon's task is he's minister of the word and minister of the altar and takes care of the poor. That's typically a deacon's task. So sometimes if you have a deacon in the parish, he will preach because he's a minister of the word. He will assist the priest at table, at the altar, because that's his task also. Not a priest, he's a deacon. So Lawrence's task was to take care of the poor in Rome. Now, the system was, if you were a practicing Christian, you were in big doo-doo. You were in trouble in the early church. The emperors did not like the fact that we, as Christians, worshipped a God that we could not see, and a God who gave us the example. The greatest example is love. That was not good in Rome. Christians did not have a good name. So if people were found out to be Christian, especially in a position of authority, like a priest, deacon, they were especially hated. And the deal was that if you go before the emperor or his governor at the time, not only were you going to be in trouble, but the people you serve were going to be in trouble, and you would have to pay a price for that, a physical price. So what he did was demand that many of the priests and deacons and bishops of the church come before him and bring money, bring tribute, and also lose their lives besides. Well, one of those deacons is Lawrence. Lawrence is well known among the poor, and he's called in to the emperor's chambers or the governor's chambers and said, okay, you're going to give your life, and before you do, we want you to pay a tithe. So next time you come here, you bring all the wealth of the church with you that you're in charge of, because he was in charge of a lot of the church's assets, and you bring them with you. Okay. So Lawrence goes out and he gets the church's assets, sells what he can sell, and gets all the money and distributes it to the poor. Then he shows up on the emperor's doorsteps, and behind him are the poor, the lame, the beggars, the lepers. I mean, tons of them. And the emperor says, what's going on? He said, well, you told me to bring the wealth of the church here. There's the wealth of the church. The poor, those who need us, those who need service, the blind, the lame. This is the wealth of the church, because we are built on the integrity of the poor, and our ministry is to serve the poor. So they are the wealth of the church. The representative of the emperor did not find that funny at all. So as a result, he bid him a slow martyrdom. He put him on a barbecue rack made for human beings, as barbaric as that sounds, to be burnt alive, but slowly. So he laid him back on his back, they lit the fire, and of course I can't imagine the pain. I had a burn accident in '91 on my left hand, and I know the pain, and the recovery is even worse than the pain of the actual burn. But Lawrence didn't have a chance to recover. When he thought he was burnt enough on one side, and here's the comedic response, he shouts up to the torturers, "Okay, you can turn me over, I'm done on one side." Now, it's hysterical, but I mean, when you think of the conditions, but he gave his life with humor. He gave his life without any doubt. I mean, the pain must have been excruciating, but he was focused on Christ. He was focused on being that seed that is buried and dies in order to blossom. And he blossoms as a martyr, as a saint, as a witness to the faith. His background is Spanish. He's buried in Rome, and his legacy goes on. 4th century, we have an example of someone who would give his life for Christ because he really believed in the word he was preaching. And not only that, he believed in the ministry of the diaconate to serve the poor. And he saw in the poor great wealth, which is so beautiful. Now, it's hard for us to see in a person laying in the street wealth. It's hard for us to look at the halfway houses or any kind of facility that serves the poor and say, well, there is our bank, there's our treasure. But that's the case. And not all of the poor in our country or our city are Catholic or even Christian or have any faith. But that's their ministry to themselves and God who created them. Our ministry is to love and serve them. And I've said it more than once, I personally am uncomfortable with giving alms to someone in the streets. I don't do that. It's in our climate, it's dangerous. In the days of Lawrence, there was a certain location outside the city walls, outside the temple, where beggars were allowed to gather. So the danger of sharing with them didn't exist as it does today. But that shouldn't hamper us from giving and from loving the poor. We have Catholic charities, we have Catholic relief, we have our own parish work. There's many, many ways. And sometimes giving to the poor shouldn't come from our pockets. It should come from our hearts. It should be called respect. It should be called love. It should be called justice. Whether the person who is poor is a Catholic, a Christian, a non-Christian, white, black, brown, it doesn't matter. These are God's treasuries, and it's up to us to share in that treasure of God to the degree that we love. We're read in honor of Lawrence because his blood was shed, his life was given, because he was that seed that was buried, that came up, blossomed as food for nourishment, for meditation, and for our growth as Christians.